course, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and I bid you all peace and mercy and grace with Salaam alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The subject is evolution in God, and obviously these are topics that get hotly debated a lot of times, and I always feel that a lot of times the debates get sort of sidetracked because a lot of times we don't understand the concepts, or maybe we don't fully understand or grasp the meaning of the terminologies. And therefore we have a tendency to segregate ideas, and then we fight on one side versus the other. Whereas in reality, there is always an overlap in everything that we talk about. That's the masterful system of the universe, that no matter how we address whatever we address, somehow there is an overlap in what we call a sharing of realities as well as the physical states. So the issue, first and foremost, I'd like to establish very clearly is, are these two issues, evolution and God, irreconcilable, or are they really naturally part of one idea that just has somehow, over a span of time, due to some misunderstandings or due to some particular positions that one side is taken versus the other? First and foremost, evolution as we understand it from an Islamic perspective is not rejected. Islam does not reject evolution as a principle where something can evolve from something else. There is no verse in the Quran where Allah forbids it, and therefore we have to be silent about it and say maybe it's possible. And we have to take that position very clearly, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us in many ways that He created things. God created things according to the Quranic principles. He created things, but that methodology of creation could have been, one of those could have been evolution. So there is no rejection per se that evolution necessarily does not exist or it's false, for there's plenty of evidence to show some kind of movement where we have some form of movement within the created beings as sharing some similar qualities. And therefore one needs to be very careful whether to say, well, this is categorically a no-no, or it's categorically possible, or it is absolutely possible. On all these three sides, as we will understand, you will see that there are problems. For those who believe in the existence of God, for example, who insist that creation is, and it's interesting, by the way, we have branded them as the creationists. And then on the opposite side, you've got these evolutionists. And this creates this segregated thought, once again, which creates problems, because the minute you start talking, the minute you've divided this discussion, the minute you start stepping over into the other side, someone says, oh, you've just given up your position, you've become a little bit of me. So if the evolutionist starts speaking about some mode of creation, he says, oh, you've become a creationist. And the minute you're a creationist and you start speaking a little bit about evolution, you said, oh, you become an evolutionist. It's almost like there's this argument that either you're on this side or on that side. And I think we need to address this carefully to understand that evolution is just a process. It's a system that even Richard Dawkins, when he was questioned on this particular issue, as much as he's written about the non-existence of God, even the book, The God Delusion, he cannot answer this question as to what is the issue as far as how did this all originate from. Evolution is a process, it's a methodology, it's a system. It is still in flux as far as we're understanding it. Our understanding of evolution is very minimal. Very, very, very minimal. Even Colin Patterson, who was a paleontologist in England, said that we know very little about evolution and its system. Because first of all, macroevolution especially is not very observable. It's very difficult to observe it. It's very difficult to replicate it in a laboratory. So we have issues pertaining to that. But the concept, the ideas, are certainly entertainable, and they are realities, and one should not reject them categorically. What we have problems here with, and I'm touching on a few different subjects, but I'm just trying to draw a clear picture for us that I think there is a misunderstanding in the concepts which has brought about this segregation of ideas. So fundamentally, let me give you the Islamic perspective, and then we can discuss the other perspectives and hopefully put some sense into it. From the Islamic perspective, it's very clear that the absolute creator, God, is the fashioner and the creator of everything. Because we understand rationally, from nothing comes nothing. We are something, okay, and we were nothing before, and therefore we have to establish somehow, where did we come from? Where did all this start from? That's very important to understand. Okay. Now, there are different arguments about this. One says, well, we came through probabilities and it was just a chance that we were born and we were created. There's another that says, no, it's impossible. From nothing comes nothing. There has to be an intelligent designer to have put us together. Otherwise, it's impossible. The system is just too complex and too structured and too well formulated and too universal for it to have simply randomly appeared from nowhere, from thin air, from this primordial soup. Even this primordial soup that we talk about, where did it come from? At the end of the day, we have to think about that reality of something existing when it was nothing before. Unless we can prove that whatever has been existing here has always existed, okay, then it's a different matter. But there is no evidence whatsoever to show that. None whatsoever, first of all. There is no evidence to show that. We know that there was a beginning. Particularly when you speak about the Big Bang Theory, it's very clear. Even Stephen Hawking speaks about this issue, that prior to Planck's moment, 1 times 10 to the minus 43 second, we cannot talk scientifically because all laws of sciences fall apart. And we understand that. So we have to stop at that moment and not discuss anything further. If you want to be philosophical about it, you can. But scientifically speaking, all the instruments of science cease to exist. Thus, there's nothing one can use unless one wants to be speculative. So having established this particular position that from an Islamic point of view, God is the creator of everything. He is the one who brings everything into existence. He is the one who is eternal, who has no beginning, no end. Now, Bertrand Russell, a famous atheist, used to ask the question that since everything needs a maker, or it needs a predecessor, who was God's predecessor? This was a classic question that Bertrand Russell asked. Who was God's creator? Who created God? Now, that's a very valid question. But we have to understand in the scheme of the realities of the life that we live in, that first and foremost, we're looking at a relative world. You and I exist in a relative realm, where time, matter, space, time-space continuum are parts of our superstructure that give us who we are and makes us who we are. Okay? We know that at Planck's moment, at the Big Bang moment, we know that all of these didn't exist and they came into existence. Now we beg the argument, the question is, what is it that caused this? Now we understand from a philosophical argument, and maybe through logic in terms of reversing our logic and going back and saying, well, what started it all? We realize that whatever started it must not have been relative, must not have been bound in time, nor matter, nor space, nor time-space continuum. Now you might say, well, isn't that pushing the envelope a little too far? Well, this is where the philosophical argument comes in. And that I'd like to establish very clearly, that at the end of the day, as scientific as we may want to be, one has to put some kind of a philosophical spin to it, otherwise it's impossible to understand anything in science. For example, in science we understand that science really, if you go into pure science, we're looking at empirical observations. And empiricists observe everything systematically, they lay things down very carefully, they monitor it, and they even question the integrity of the observation. Because sometimes the observation could be skewed on the basis of some biases that we may have placed. As a result, it's very important to make the process as pure and as clean as possible so that the results are corroborated or at least as valid as possible. And that's logical. So scientifically speaking, we have a systematic approach in a scientific system. But that's just empirical observation. So if I observe the expansion of the universe, and I've made a notation of it, correct? And I've shown the redshift, and I'm showing that the universe is expanding, okay, that's nice and dandy. What do you do after that? Well, I'm going to tie in this and with that. Okay, at the end of the day, I can make all the observations in the world. I can observe atoms, I can go subatomically to observe, I can observe superstructures. Then what? Do I stop? He says, well, now you're a scientist. You've made total observations. Okay, then what do I do with all of this observation? Do I tie it in with something? Do I make sense out of it? Oh, make sense out of it. What does it mean, make sense? Oh, I'm going to now describe what's happening. But am I being very scientific here? Maybe my description is very experiential, which may be biased, and I may be putting a spin on it to see it the way I want on the basis of how I see the world. Now what happens? Suddenly you start treading into the philosophical realm, and now you start spinning ideas based on what you've just seen. which is a classical issue with regards to morality, for example, in ethics. Ethics are unobservable in pure science and empiricists. Empiricists cannot observe the concept of good and evil. There's no concept of good and evil in the universe. Cosmologically speaking, even when we look empirically, and you observe chemistry, for example, there's no such thing as good chemistry and evil chemistry. Chemistry is chemistry. Biology is biology. When I dissect a creature, I see what's happening, and I see mechanisms. I write it down, and I can somehow manipulate that through cause and effect. Okay, nice. Then what? Then why do I have a board of ethicists? In genetic, in recombinant DNA, for example, you've got a board of ethicists that manage what kind of research you can do.